David Brister here with another episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Collective Soul. And definitely Collective Soul was an extremely popular band in the 90s, and if you weren't really around or weren't, really listening to rock music at that time, they were huge. They were everywhere. They came out with the song Shine. That's the first song I ever heard from them. It caught my ear. And at that time, I do remember it was kind of rare to hear a rock song on the radio with a guitar solo. When I heard the riff and I heard the solo, and I was like, hey, I think I like these guys. The 90s were really weird. It was a weird time to be a rock or metal or shred guitar player because everything that you understood and you knew just kind of disappeared, over the course of, just a few years. The music industry just did a 180, and then suddenly guitar solos weren't cool anymore. And, there were all these things that just kind of changed. And I do remember I was really into Dream Theater. I was really into Tool and some groups like that, Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. And so I still, kind of was satisfying that hard rock and heavy riff, upbringing that I'd had. But then when I heard Collective Soul, it kind of hit my melodic interest or tendencies. It was like, okay, here's this kind of newer group, very melodic, vocal songs, good guitar parts, well crafted rock and pop songs. And I did catch Collective Soul. It was back in 1999, and I guess that would have been around like the Dosage tour. And Marvelous 3 opened for him, and that was Butch Walker's old kind of short-lived group that he had. And I remember Marvelous 3 came out, a three-piece, and they were just totally rocking it. And the memory of that concert, as far as Marvelous 3's set, was Butch Walker kept doing all these interesting things with his picks. And it just kind of started like maybe 2 or 3 songs into their set, and he started tossing picks out in the crowd. Then he started like flipping them over his back into the crowd. He was kicking them into the crowd. He would throw one up, let it bounce off his guitar into the crowd. And it became like this, secondary part of their show or their set because they were playing music. He was playing guitar, he was singing, but then he was also doing these like circus tricks with his picks, and the crowd really got into it. And I remember there was something he did and he dropped one, and I remember hearing part of the crowd go, "Oh!" So it was really weird to see all that pick activity. And then when Collective Soul came out, I remember I was so impressed. They came out, they were wearing suits. They all had like Paul Reed Smith guitars, very classy, when they took the stage. And I remember, whoa. And I knew they had 3 guitar players, but I didn't really understand what they did, like as far as the 3 guitars. I'm going to try to keep this lesson somewhere around standard tuning, but there are going to be some different tunings. There's a kind of an open tuned acoustic piece I'm going to break down. I'm going to do some acoustic and electric stuff. And I did have some requests for more acoustic material, so I'm going to supply a little bit more acoustic info and some chord action for acoustic guitarists out there. And I'm also going to demonstrate the Ebow at the end of this lesson too. All right, the first example is from the song Shine, which I did recently mention this song very briefly in the 80s Chordplay episode that I recently did. And I was talking about the Cult. I did relate this to the song Shine, and I figured, well, I'm making a Collective Soul lesson, I might as well show it again. So Shine is really just using the open D string as a drone, and then they're playing this melodic line along the G string, and it sounds like this. And I know the first time I ever heard that song, the riff just grabbed me because I liked the intro. And then just the heavy, drop D aspect of it too was really cool. Which that's really standard, these days. But at the time, it seemed so different. I remember it caught my ear. The next example is from the song The World I Know, and this is from their very popular, self-titled release. And I know when I first heard the song, I liked it, and I had a lot of students and friends, I think even like my girlfriend at the time, was, can you play that song? And I couldn't figure out the chords. And I remember I sat there and I was trying to find it with like bar chords, and I could hear there was something different going on. But I'll never forget, I was randomly at a music store and I heard somebody, playing this like back where the acoustic guitars were. And I could tell from hearing it, I was like, oh my gosh, that guy's playing it right. So I like kind of sneakily made my way back to the acoustic area and pretended like I was, looking at guitars. And the whole time I'm like looking over trying to figure out, how he was playing it. And, I caught a peek, and then I remember I went home and grabbed my guitar and started playing this. And it's very simple. It's based around basic chords. It's like a B minor, there's an F sharp minor 6, and then a G, and then an A add 11. But I remember, when I learned that chord sequence, I'd never played chords like that before, and it opened a whole new door to chords for me, because I thought, wow, that's really cool. And I was used to bar chords and power chords and some, chord mutations, but I'd never really encountered that until that song. And, like I said, it kind of opened some doors, and I started to experiment, with those shapes, and kind of coming up, with different ways of playing with those chords. I also moved that idea to other strings, and kind of played around with chords like that. So instead of based off the low E, I was basing chords off the A, But that's a really interesting, sequence of chords. The interlude from that song is actually also pretty interesting. It's very simple, and I've said this in a few episodes already. Music doesn't have to be hard to play, for it to be good. And music that is hard to play doesn't immediately mean that it is good, Usually, especially in rock and pop and songs that are very popular with lots of people, usually simple songs are the ones that stand the test of time and are remembered forever. Look at Beatles and Bob Dylan and stuff like that. Those songs will be studied and analyzed and discussed for eternity. Something like Dragon Force, I like it, but more than likely people aren't going to be talking about Dragon Force in 100 years, but they're probably going to be talking about the Beatles, which is something to think about. But for this interlude, he's just really playing around with like B minor, and he's doing this little arpeggio. Very simple, it's just, single notes kind of mixed in with that open B string, and it's just playing a melody, but it's extremely effective. Another song from the same album that's extremely popular, and I know I've taught this to a lot of students. I used to play this in a cover band for, a few years, but the song December, was another kind of eye-opening song for me because, I was learning chords and trying to learn some new things, and I heard that song, and I could tell just by hearing it, I thought they're doing something really different with their chords. And so then I kind of sat there and wanted to figure out how to play it. So it's based around G, and then the bass note is going to change. And it has a very, distinct sound. Tailor-made for the radio. It's really just kind of a G5, and then he lowers the root down to F, and then a C sus2, and then a B flat 6 for a second. Then he kind of raises that B flat up to B. But that's a really interesting guitar part. The song Needs, which is another radio hit of theirs from a different album, they kind of borrowed a little bit of that chord sequence in a way, and they modified it. But as soon as I heard the song Needs, I was like, that sounds kind of like December, and that would be same G that they had in December, the C sus2, and then then a G over B, and then a G over F sharp. Which you can kind of think of that as an upside down, you know, G major 7 chord, because there's your major 7 as the root. Which is weird, but I like it. The next example comes from the song Bling, and I know the first time I ever heard this song, I mean, it's obviously a little acoustic kind of intro. It has this swampy, bluesy, you know, kind of sound to it, but it caught my ear. And at the time, I really wasn't that comfortable or accustomed to using open tunings and altered tunings like that. So I really didn't bother learning it until years later. And then, you know, it kind of hit me in the ear again, you know, years later, and I thought, you know, I'm gonna sit down and learn how to play that. And it's really cool, this finger style kind of acoustic intro. And I remember the first time I heard that, it just resonated with me. I thought, man, I really like that kind of swampy, kind of blues sound. And I really like that kind of, you know, the way that it resolves, you know, back to, you know, that open D. So, you know, the capo's on the 3rd fret, and we're in open D tuning, which, you know, if you're, you know, a slide player or you're into, you know, altered tunings on acoustic, you know, open D is pretty standard or kind of well known. But there you've got, you know, D, A, D, F sharp, A, D. So it's, you know, definitely a few strings are left standard, and then everything else is kind of moved around. But really interesting tuning and really interesting guitar part too. All right, the last example is from the song Forgiveness, which is from their Discipline Breakdown album. And I've always liked this song. It's very simple. You know, there's nothing crazy, you know, happening as far as the guitar parts or anything like that. But it's just a well-written, well-crafted song, which a lot of Collective Soul's music is that way. It's just when you hear it, you're like, gosh, every note means something. Every change, you know, takes the song somewhere. And to me, that's the sign of a great song, a well-written song. You know, if it sounds complete, you don't really want to change anything or take something away or add something else. That's the, you know, the sign of a really good, you know, rock song or pop tune, metal tune, jazz song, whatever. But with this, it's a very simple progression, and I'm also going to demonstrate the Ebow as promised. So the chord progression, they're really just playing with basic bar chords. So I'm demonstrating this more as a showcase for the Ebow, but also to kind of reveal a little bit of how they would put their, you know, guitar parts together. All right, so now I'm looping that guitar part, and I'm just going to add the Ebow part on top. The interesting thing about the Ebow is just the sound it kind of gives, you know, melodies and melodic ideas like that. And I've actually used the Ebow on a lot of my own music and recordings over the years. You know, and it has this very interesting, you know, almost kind of a bowed, you know, like a cello or something, or a violin, viola. And I'm really a big Ebow fan, and I love, you know, hearing a song and I catch it. It's like, oh, there's Pink Floyd or U2 or, you know, Tool, and there's a whole bunch of stuff out there that has that little Ebow effect. Leave some feedback and some comments, and please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back with some more lessons and material very soon. Thank you.